Good morning, or evening, or afternoon, whenever it is you're joining us for worship. We're going to try something different today for music. What I've missed most when we've not been together these last several weeks has been singing. Seems like the only time I really sing is when we're doing hymns at church. So today I would invite all of you to join us as we sing one of our favorite hymns, Just a Closer Walk with Thee. Dana and I will be leading it, and Chaney's going to have the words available for you, so just follow along, sing with your hearts to your souls, sing with your families, or just pray the words as we sing together.
I am weak, but thou art strong. Jesus, keep me from all wrong. I'll be satisfied as long as I walk. Let me walk close to thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. Through this world of toil and snares, if I falter, Lord, who cares? Oh, with me my burden shares, none but thee, dear Lord, none but thee. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be. When my feeble life is o'er, time for me will be no more. Guide me gently, safely o'er to thy shore, dear Lord, to thy shore. Just a closer walk with thee. Granted, Jesus is my plea. Daily walking close to thee. Let it be, dear Lord, let it be.
Well, good morning. So good to see you all online again. As you know, this is our last bit of our sermon series. We're finishing up one on gospel discipleship, which is based off a book by the Reverend Dr. Michelle Morris, a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine, who wrote this book. And so we're finishing this up today, talking about Johannine disciples. I'm so thankful for those who have tuned in up to this point, who hopefully have learned by now what your type of discipleship is. Are you a Markan? Are you Matthean? Are you Lucan? Or are you Johannine? Hopefully this helps you to identify your um, discipleship and knowing how God grows you as a disciple so that you can be better involved in your church, you can be better involved in the Bible and other spiritual practices that God has for you. I do want to remind you of a few things that are coming up. The first thing I want to let y'all know is that the Upper Room devotional, which many of you read over here at Kibler, it's available now for the weeks of or the months of July and August. And so I'll put some of these over in the blessing box, like as last time. and they'll be there for anyone who wishes to pick them up. I got these big ones and also the smaller ones. And then I want to tell you about a couple things that are happening this week. On Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, there is a women's study group that meets online on Zoom. And they're meeting. They started meeting last week. They'll continue meeting for the next few weeks. And this is a video thing you can do online. And they're still, if you want, if any ladies, if you still want to join, there's still plenty of time to do that. The best thing for you to do if you don't have information on this is to sign up for our newsletter. And you can do that. There will be a link here in the bio for you. And if you click on that, you can sign up, and we'll make sure that you get the information you need so that you can be getting information about how you can get involved in the ministries of this church. The second thing is we have a group starting this Wednesday, July the 1st at 7 o'clock. We'll be meeting online. We'll also be meeting as a small group here in person. For those that wish to meet in person, this will be available to you. For those that want to meet online, it'll be as simple as clicking the link on the newsletter that we'll send to you. This study is going to be on a video series for the next several weeks called The Color of Compromise. It's a great study that I have went through that I think is going to be very beneficial for our churches, talking about the history of racism in our churches, the ways that so much of our foundation, so much of our history has been dealing with this topic, and we have not yet got to the other side. And so we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to start a new sermon series next Sunday. And this sermon series is going to be, it's going to be a very challenging series for us. It's going to be a challenging series for me to preach, especially one that is going to do some things technologically, doing some storytelling that I'm not completely comfortable with, but we're learning together. And it'll also be on racism. Bethany and I are actually going to be taking a road trip this weekend. For the next couple days, we're going to be driving from here in Alma to Atlanta. And we'll be making stops along the way and filming some stories that you need to hear, that we all need to listen to, that have to deal with the history of our church, especially around the topic of race. So we'll be going through Little Rock, we'll be going through Memphis, we'll be going through Birmingham, and then eventually getting to Atlanta. And on the way home, we'll stop at other spots, going up north as well to different areas. And we'll be keeping social distance. We'll be wearing our masks. We'll be staying with folks that have been quarantined, folks that have not, that have been tested, folks that we're going to be keeping as safe as we can. And then on Sunday afternoons, or after service, I should say, at 11 o'clock, we're also doing a book study. This one is by Jim Wallace called America's Original Sin. I've also read this book several times. I've done a study with this at a church, and it was very eye-opening, heart-opening, mind-opening, and so this study was really important to do here as well. If you can imagine, it also deals with the topic of race. This book, we'll start learning and going through this on July the 5th, and so if you want a copy of this book, you just there's a button to click in the newsletter for us to send you a copy, and it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. We'll send this to you. All right? So there's several ways to be involved, and I'll just put it out there. If you can't do one of these, you really don't care about what we're doing. And it's important that you do, because this is a lot. This is a lot for us to put together, a ton. And we need your help to do it. We need your help to make it worthwhile. We need your help to know that what we're doing is not in vain, but what we're doing is to try to educate one another and to wrestle with these topics. I understand that this is a hot topic in our society, and we oftentimes want to ignore it, not even want to talk about it. But as a church, it's vital that we have these conversations here because we have something that society doesn't. We have something we come from a different point of view than society comes from. We come from this reality that as children of God, we are all God's children. That as followers of Jesus, Jesus has given us commandments that doesn't that creates that goes across all race lines, and has given us a rich history that we need to embrace. But we also know that there are times in the history of our church that we have not lived up to our best ideals. And so we need to talk about these things. So I need your help. I need you to be involved. I need you to either buy this, read this book. We're not even asking you to pay for it. We'll send you a free copy. If you aren't even willing to be a part of the group, that's fine. Tell me you want the book, and I'll send you the book. You can read on your own time. Okay, it's that important to us to do this. And then when it comes to the sermon series, I'm going to ask you to not only watch the series for the next several weeks, but share it. Share it on your Facebook page so other people can see what we're talking about. Because you're going to be surprised by the number of folks who are looking for some other conversation about this topic that doesn't try to divide us by whether or not you're a Republican or a Democrat. I'm tired of the Republican answers, and I'm tired of the Democrats' answers because neither one of them really address this. What it really comes down to is what is the church going to say, and what is the church going to do? And so I hope that you embrace this. Last thing, for those who have been visiting, maybe for the first time this morning, I do want to remind you that we have a gift to send to you. We have something that we do as disciples here at the Alma and Kibler Church that is so good resource for us. It is called Right Now Media, and it has over 20,000 videos and discipleship materials for yourself and for your family, and it's free. We want to send that to you. We want to send you a link so you can download it. So what you'll need to do is text Right Now Kibler to 41411, and we will send you the link so that you can sign up for free. It doesn't cost you anything. There's no credit cards or anything like that involved. This is just our gift to you for tuning in today. Most of the materials in our small groups are formed from videos off of Right Now Media. Johannine disciples. That's our topic this morning. We've been talking for the last several weeks about discipleship types. We've been going through the different gospels. There are 4 gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each gospel tells stories a little bit different. Each gospel has some unique stories. Each gospel focuses on different aspects of those stories because each gospel is written for a different audience. Markan disciples are different than Matthean disciples, are different than Lucans, and different than Johannines. That's why there's at least 4 gospels. There's at least 4 different types of disciples in the scriptures. Every one of them interacts with God a little bit differently. So we've talked about the first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Today we're talking about Johannine disciples. I happen to be a Johannine disciple, so this is one that resonates with me. It's something that when I read about this type, when I took the assessment for myself, I realized this makes sense. This sounds a lot like me. This is my primary type. My secondary is Matthean, which I think work well together. Johannine disciples are interesting because unlike Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Gospel of John is very different than the other 3 Gospels. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we call these the synopsis Gospels, synoptic Gospels, because there are so many similarities. They have the same stories. They have the same sort of plots. So much of what happens in Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the same. Now, there are some obvious differences. There are some more stories in Luke and in Matthew than others. Matthew has a lot of Jesus' teaching ministry, but talks about the commandments because Jesus is treated like this new Moses. And in Mark, it's a very short gospel, but it's very, everything happens immediately. Everything happens from one thing to the next. Jesus is constantly moving, a lot like the Spirit moves. Jesus talks about the Spirit being like the wind. You don't know where it's coming from or where it's going, but you can only know when it's come by. So Jesus, like the Holy Spirit in Mark, is constantly moving, is constantly on the go. And then John's gospel is very different. 90% of John's gospel is not found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That's how unique it is in the four gospels. So many stories are in John that aren't anywhere else. One being the story we get in John chapter 3. Maybe the most quotable verse in our lifetime, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. This little summary verse that encapsulates the whole of the gospel. But it is who Jesus is talking to that really gets to the whole gospel of John and why John is written the way it is. In John's gospel, Jesus is speaking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Nicodemus is a Pharisee. He's someone whose job is to teach others about the commandments of God. But he is having this existential crisis because he sees Jesus as this great leader, this great teacher, but the things that Jesus is doing contradict Nicodemus's belief about what a real good Pharisee or rabbi is supposed to do. He has been taught certain things by other people, by other religious leaders, and yet Jesus is teaching something different. And so he comes to Jesus at night for instruction. And Jesus patiently sits there one-on-one with Nicodemus and teaches Nicodemus the hard realities of what his gospel is, telling Nicodemus that if he wants to be a disciple, if he wants to follow God, he has to be reborn. Not just by water, as we're all born into this world, but by the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God. See, John's gospel focuses a lot on these interactions Jesus has with a very small group of people. Unlike the gospel of Matthew or Luke or even Mark, Jesus in those gospels goes out and there's these large crowds, and the disciples are, we think, just kind of sitting around in the midst of these larger crowds. And so when Jesus is teaching, he's teaching everybody at the same time. But in John's gospel, Jesus often teaches to only the 12 disciples in these very intimate gatherings where Jesus is the mentor to these apprentices. He's constantly trying to teach them how they are one day supposed to take the mantle that Jesus has created so that they can continue the mission that he's created for them. Jesus is always teaching these 12. In fact, in John's gospel, there's also this group of 3. So it's not just the 12 disciples, but then there's even the smaller group of 3 disciples who Jesus teaches. And then in John's gospel, unlike the others, there's the beloved disciple, the disciple whom Jesus loved, the one who was the closest to Jesus. The other disciples, the other gospels rather, they don't have this. They don't have this understanding of this sort of Jesus as mentor and the rest of us as apprentice. They don't have this deep, intimate connection where it's about sitting there with Jesus and listening to him teach so that we can learn and we can then implement this with each other. Jesus is very intentional in John's gospel to teach the disciples about how they are to love one another. In Matthew and Luke's gospel, Jesus gives the commandments that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then to love others as yourself. In John's gospel, that commandment doesn't come to almost the very end when Jesus is about to be arrested, and he tells just the disciples that the world will know you are my disciples by the way you love one another. Now, what Jesus is saying specifically is to these 12, that if they will stay in love with one another the way that Jesus has loved them, then the world will know that they are Jesus' disciples. See, in John's gospel, you start on this very small scale, this very intimate scale with just a few folks, and then you reach out to others. It's unlike the other gospels. And I think the reason is because in John's gospel, Johannine disciples they thrive in those deep personal relationships where they have a mentor like Jesus that they're learning from, that they have someone to study, someone to mimic, someone to idolize and look at what they're doing and then and put that in their own lives. Johannine disciples care about being mentored, but also mentoring. They thrive in those personal one-on-one connections. And they oftentimes look for great teachers. They seek them out. They seek out those folks that are experts in their field, and they learn from them. They want knowledge. They want to know how they are to live their lives. And the best thing for a Johannine disciple is they are going to want to find the answers. If they have a deep personal or spiritual crisis, you better believe that they're going to have a book. In fact, Johannine disciples, they are the ones whose bookshelves are full. They're folks that have books stacked up beside their bed. They're folks that, if you go into their office, there's not only books all over the shelves, but there's books all over the desk, there's books in the chairs. They're the ones that have to move things out of the way because they have papers and things everywhere. And it may be the case that they bought all of these books, and some of them they've read twice. But most of them, they've read a little bit and then stuck it on a shelf. Now, they don't get rid of them most of the time because they never know when they might need that again. Johannine disciples, although they want to be experts in certain things, they oftentimes will also know a little bit about a lot of things. They want the knowledge and the expertise to know how they're supposed to live their lives. In my own life, I have always had a mentor. Looking back even to the time I was in high school, I had a mentor that, and I could name all of my mentors because I've had several. And a lot of them I've maybe moved away from because of transitions. You know, when you move from one school to a new one, when you move to college, you kind of lose these connections. But I've always had teachers in my life, always, who have taught me deep spiritual realities that I needed, that I was seeking out. Oftentimes, these mentors did not find me. I had to find them. And I sought their knowledge. I sought their wisdom because I wanted to know more about this life that I was to live. And the reason that I picked the ones I did is because they were the ones that, to me, either had the most knowledge about or who lived and represented the most of who I believe Jesus was, who I believe Jesus is. And so I sought these folks out. Johannine disciples have these people in their life. If you're a Johannine disciple and you don't have a mentor, it's still possible that you have some mentorship in your life. You have picked up a study. Maybe you've done an online class, or maybe you're taking classes. Johannines are lifelong learners. They're the folks that would, and this is in Michelle's book, and I read this and thought, this is so funny, because she mentions in her book that Johannine disciples are the ones that will take a vacation and they'll use that vacation to further their knowledge in a particular study, which is exactly what we're about to do. And that makes sense. You don't want to waste any opportunity where you could be learning and growing in the knowledge of Jesus Christ and of his love and of how you want to be a better person for others. Now, we all want to be better. We all want to be disciples. But how we do this is a little bit different. For Johannines, it's those deep personal relationships. Now, here's the reason that this is different from other discipleship types. Lucans have deep personal relationships with one another, but these are folks that are mostly colleagues. These are folks that they see there's some equity in a relationship. This is different than Johannines because Johannines are actually looking for someone that they sort of idolize, someone that they feel like is ahead of the game, someone that they feel like has started running the race and is way ahead, and they're reaching out for the baton. They want to find somebody that they feel like is ahead of where they want to be. They want to get to where that person is. And so there is no equity in that kind of a relationship. They see this person as an authority, as someone that they want their knowledge and their know-how to eventually get to where they are. That's why Johannines are the ones that are always wanting to be around the pastor. They see the pastor as that authority figure, that person who has the knowledge and the know-how on how to live like Jesus. And so they want to spend as much time with the pastor as they can. The struggle with the Johannine pastor is that oftentimes, although certain personalities can seem friendly to all people, Johannines have a very small group of those folks who are deep, deep personal friends, people that they can be the most intimate and bare their soul with. And then the rest of folks are really acquaintances. Johannines aren't the folks that are incredibly relational people. They're not folks that are incredibly spirit-driven folks in the sense that Markins are. These are folks that want to learn and become an expert in something. And so, for instance, if we're starting a new program at the church on food insecurity, Johannines will be the folks that will look at this and they'll say, how can we make this better? How can we make sure we're doing what Jesus would do? And so they'll go back and they'll want to study. They'll want to look at all of the potential problems that a program may or may not have and immediately try to learn from other folks to figure out how to do this. They're the ones that will call other people and say, I know that you have a ministry that's similar to this one. What are some things you learned? What are some things that didn't work well for you? They want to try to do all of this. The struggle with a Johannine is, although you want to be the expert, something that you have to keep in mind, although that's good, because you are the folks that in the meeting, you'll raise your hand and say, well, I've studied this. I know you have this question. I think I can answer it. And most people will want to know this. They'll want to move quick. But Johannines, where you're going to struggle is remember that although you may know a lot about something, although you may be the expert, not everybody is going to trust your expertise, and not everybody is going to respect you. That's hard for Johannines, because when a Johannine takes everything that they have to learn a particular subject, and then they've mastered that subject, they're looking for folks to then teach. They're looking for folks to disciple. They're looking for folks that want a mentor and see a mentor in them. They're constantly wanting to take this knowledge but then pass it on. But when you start to pass on that knowledge, be careful. If people aren't asking for your advice, if people aren't asking for your expertise, don't be surprised that if you offer it, they don't always receive it. For Johannine pastors, that is very difficult, because you expect that people are going to want to listen to what you are offering. They're going to take it, and their lives are going to be transformed. Johannines, you can't change people. That's only the work of God, the work of the Holy Spirit. As much as you might offer really good things, and you might pass on wisdom and knowledge and everything you know about Jesus, people still have free will. People still, especially in our society where expertise and experts aren't trusted, where institutions aren't trusted, not everyone's going to want to listen to what you have to say. Johannines would be good to remember to stay humble. That your knowledge, even though you can see the benefit of it, most people, they just care if you love them. And they may not understand that the way you're trying to show them love is giving them advice. They might not understand that when someone comes to you and says, I'm struggling with getting out of debt, and so you offer a book, or you offer advice, or you offer a story, or some way that you have studied this and figured out how to fix it yourself. Some people don't want to hear that. They just want you to sit there with them and relate. That's hard for Johannines to do. It's a lot like in a marriage. I had to learn this early on in my own marriage, that when my wife sat down and was talking to me about, daily struggles or something that was bothering her, she wasn't telling me that because she wanted my advice or my opinion or my solution. She was telling me that because she just wanted to relate. She wanted to, bare her soul and allow me to sit in that same space. Johannines know that when people do that, they're not wanting a solution. They're just wanting you to relate to them. They want you to stay in that spot with them. And that's hard for Johannines because oftentimes we know the handful of folks that we do that with, and we don't want to do that with anybody else. We've got those two friends that we've had forever, that maybe we were studying together, or there was something that we did that we met them, and we latched onto each other. Sometimes it's folks that, in my case, I was studying something alongside this other person who was a colleague, and because we both had the same pursuit, we both began to be closer together. We had something in common, some goal in common, that's what brought us together. Those people that you have in your life, I know that you might think these are the folks that are going to be my best friends forever, and you distance yourself from everybody else. Don't do that. There's still opportunities for you to meet new people and grow closer together in those intimate spaces. Johannines also would do well to remember, as we talked about, taking that knowledge and passing it on. Don't miss that part. Just because there are some people who may not want to hear what you have to say, there are a lot of people that do. And so Johannines, find those opportunities that you can also pass on the wisdom and the knowledge that you have. Don't only have a mentor in your life or mentors in your life, but also have those that you are discipling, those that you're mentoring. A good opportunity for you to do this is in a church setting. If the scriptures are what you are an expert in, the ones that you study the most of, or maybe there's a subject, find a way that you can be teaching others in your church. Offering a study that people could come to or not come to. That might be a good opportunity because you need that to be able to serve one another, because that's how you do it. You learn something and then you pass it on. So you have to have that key element of passing on what you're learning. The other thing about the Gospel of John, and the reason that that's important, is that towards the very end of the Gospel of John, unlike the Gospel of Matthew that just sort of ends, the Gospel of Mark rather just sort of ends, and there's the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus is resurrected and then tells his disciples, go into all the world, teaching and baptizing them. And then in Luke's Gospel where Jesus shows up, and he shows up to a lot of different people at different times, because all these people are together, but they're together in different places, and so Jesus has to show up to all of them in different ways. In John's Gospel, Peter, who was one of the closest disciples of Jesus, forsakes him and abandons him. And he watched Jesus killed and put in a tomb. And unlike the other Gospels, Peter doesn't, in John's Gospel, doesn't go to the tomb to find Jesus. Peter is back to his old job. He's fishing. He is in a boat, and he's off in the lake trying to catch some fish. And he looks over early on Easter morning, and he sees this man walking on the seashore. He's wondering who in the world this is. And when he gets closer, he sees that it's Jesus, and Jesus is there cooking Peter breakfast. And so he sits down, he eats with Jesus, and Jesus asks Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, of course I love you, Lord. And Jesus says, then feed my sheep. Johannines, we can get so enraptured with wanting to be close to Jesus, just wanting to be close to him, just wanting to do everything and be just like him. So much of our focus can be so much about trying to be like Jesus that we forget that there are people around us that we still need to love. There are people around us that they don't always understand why we seem to be distant, why we seem to be off studying or doing something else. They don't realize, because we haven't told them we're doing this, because we want to learn how to be better for you. We want to learn how to be more like Jesus for you. We are missing that part, and Peter missed that part. He went back, he was by himself fishing. Jesus comes to him in his loneliness in that moment of complete by himself and says, Peter, if you really love me, and I know you do, but if you really do, you got to get out there. You got to be teaching others. You got to be discipling them. Johannines, don't be lonely. Don't be off to yourselves. Don't be the ones that get so busy contemplating the next thing, studying and thinking so much about something that is a deep, profound truth that you forget that there are people around you still that need you, people around you that just want to linger, and you need to let them. Maybe you're a Johannine disciple. I surely am. Johannine Matthean, which means that not only as a Johannine do I love to study and do I love to learn things, not only as a Johannine are there certain things I know a church and people need to do in order to get to a certain point, which is why I might come in and seem like I've got a lot of ideas. But as a Matthean also, I also want to get things done. I want to do things. That's good and bad. For the Alma Church, as a Johannine Matthean pastor, it's easy to cast a vision and then want to start implementing things immediately. The struggle has been to slow down, to make sure everyone's included in the conversation before we move forward. I've learned that, and I've tried to do better. At Kibler is a Matthean church, which means that the struggle for us is a little bit different. Our struggle is not that we don't move. Our struggle is we may move too fast. We might have a really good idea and then do something, and then after we do it, realize, you know what? There might have been a cheaper way to do that, or maybe a better way to do that, or maybe we moved too quickly. That's going to be a struggle with my pastorship type and the discipleship type of the church. The other thing that's going to be hard in the Kibler church is wanting. I love to preach. I love to teach, but y'all love to work. And so sometimes when I want to have a conversation or talk about a particular thing and try to study before we do something, y'all are wanting to do something quick. One of the things that's hard for us is to take a step back and look at the ministries that we're currently involved in and figure out how we can make them better, or how we can adapt and change them a little bit to do the things that we know we should be doing. Oftentimes we get so busy just trying to get stuff done that we don't have that time to sit back and take a step back. But we're going to learn that. We're going to do that together. I can't stress enough the importance of being involved, of being in tune, of being connected in the next several weeks. I can't stress this enough. If of all the things that we have done in the last 2 years, this is by far the most important thing we are going to do. If this is the last thing that we do, it will be worth it. Not that would be, but I can't stress enough how much work and how much energy is going into this to have this conversation, and we need to. So please, please, please find a way to get connected in the next couple weeks. If you're not getting the newsletter, there's a link in the bio that you can click on, or you can just email me and I'll add it to you. Email is doug.phillips@arumc.org. Be here on the screen so you can see that, and if you'll send me an email, I'll add it to you, okay? And we'll make sure you get all the information you need. Last thing, remember to give to the ministries of your church, whether to Alma or Kibler UMC. And remember to write on the memo line how much you want of your check to go to the ACOC so that we can send that out. I will say that what's phenomenal is in the last 4 months that we haven't got a chance to meet in person, giving has at both churches, y'all have done well to give to the ministries of your church. We have cut some expenses, but not nearly as much as we had anticipated, but we are right where we need to be. And so I just want to say thank you so much for not forgetting your church, for not forgetting the ways we need to continue to do ministry, and also how much you've given to the ACOC, because they need it and you continue to supply it, and we need to continue to do that. Let us pray. Gracious God, I thank you so much for both of these churches, for their disciples type, Lord, for those that are Markan and Matthean, Lucan, Johannine. Lord, hopefully this study we have learned a little bit more about ourselves and gained some awareness of who we are, of why we do the things that we do, and also why other people do the things they do, and helping us to understand how all of us have a unique way that we grow, and a unique way that we serve you, a unique way that we show our love, a unique way that we build relationships, that we all have our own strengths, but we also have our struggles. God, I pray that this has taught us how to be humble in our weaknesses, how to be excited about our strengths, and also how to look at others and be patient, to know where they are weak, and to know how we can serve them. God, I pray that for the next several weeks, as we venture into what you're calling us to do, that we don't do this typically, we don't do this just because it's another thing to do, but that you have led us into this place to have this conversation about what has been a conversation we've needed to have for a very long time. God, I pray that both churches will be involved and invested in the hard work ahead, and that we won't just sit there, Lord, but that we will engage, that your Spirit will change our minds and our hearts, that our hands will be open to doing the hard work ahead, that we could see our world, our community, and all the lives that we encounter, Lord, truly changed. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.